June 1944. The Pacific War was at its tipping point. For American submariners, it was a conflict defined by a chilling statistic. Between December 1941 and March 1944, Japanese destroyers had sunk 14 American submarines. In that same period, not a single U.S. submarine had managed to sink an enemy destroyer in a head-to-head fight. The math was brutally simple, and it favored the hunters. A destroyer could slice through the water at 35 knots. A submerged submarine, struggling with battery power, could barely make 9. To be detected by a destroyer meant one thing: run. Dive deep, rig for silent running, and hope the depth charges exploding above you were just a little bit off target. This was the unspoken doctrine. This was survival. But one man, in one steel tube, was about to tear up that rulebook and rewrite it in a blast of torpedo fire. Commander Samuel D. Dealey, commanding officer of the USS Harder, was 37 years old. He was a veteran of 4 previous war patrols, a quiet Texan with a steely gaze. By June 1944, he and his crew had already sent 18 enemy ships to the bottom. But for Dealey, the ultimate predator, the destroyer, remained an unconquered threat. That frustration ended not in the chaos of June, but in a calculated gambit 2 months earlier. The moment of revolution came on April 13, 1944. The Harder had been stalking a convoy when the Japanese destroyer Ikazuchi, a veteran of the Pearl Harbor attack, turned the tables. Detecting the submerged submarine, Ikazuchi's captain ordered flank speed and charged directly at Harder's position. Her bow wave a white knife in the dark water. On the bridge of the submerged Harder, through the periscope, the sight was terrifying. Every instinct, every ounce of training screamed, dive, evade. Dealey's order cut through the tension. All ahead flank, steady on her bow. He wasn't running. He was charging. This was the birth of the down-the-throat shot. A tactic born not from blind aggression, but from cold, analytical logic. Dealey had studied the failed attacks, the missed opportunities. He understood a critical flaw in the destroyer captain's mindset. They expected the submarine to flee. By charging instead, Harder presented the narrowest possible target, her bow, while throwing the destroyer's command into a split-second crisis of decision. Turn? Ram? Fire? That moment of hesitation was the window. As Ikazuchi closed to 900 yards, point-blank range, Dealey fired a spread of 4 torpedoes from his forward tubes. The electric Mark 18 torpedoes streaked through the water on a collision course. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, 2 massive detonations amidships. The Ikazuchi, struck in her vitals, erupted in a fireball. She sank in under 5 minutes. The hunter had become the prey. Dealey's after-action report to command was a masterpiece of laconic understatement. Expended 4 torpedoes, 1 destroyer. That radio message crackled through the Pacific submarine force, not just as news of a kill, but as a revelation. It was possible. The invincible hunter could be killed. But in the Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters, the reaction was fury, not inspiration. Admiral Soemu Toyota, commander of the combined fleet, was finalizing plans for Operation A-Go, a decisive counterstroke against the expected American invasion of the Philippines. Its success hinged on the precise coordination of his mighty mobile fleet, a task force gathering at the remote anchorage of Tawi-Tawi. Its escort screen of destroyers was its lifeblood, protecting the precious carriers and battleships from underwater threats. And now, an American submarine was demonstrating a terrifying new way to bleed that lifeblood away. Between January and May 1944, Japan had already lost 23 destroyers. Toyota could not afford more. He needed a secure bastion for his fleet. He believed he had one in Tawi-Tawi, nestled in the Sulu archipelago. Its proximity to Borneo oil was an advantage, but its narrow labyrinthine straits were a dangerous, double-edged sword, perfect for ambush. Unbeknownst to Toyota, American codebreakers had pierced Japanese naval codes. They knew the mobile fleet was concentrating there. The American submarine commander for the Pacific, Admiral Charles Lockwood, saw a golden opportunity. He needed a boat with a captain who was bold, skilled, and now proven against destroyers. He sent the Harder. Her orders: patrol the waters off Tawi-Tawi and attack targets of opportunity. For Dealey, it wasn't just a patrol. It was an invitation to a duel. For 9 tense days, Harder ghosted through the approaches to Tawi-Tawi, unseen. Dealey watched through his periscope as the might of the Japanese Navy assembled. The colossal battleship Yamato, 9 aircraft carriers, cruisers, and a forest of destroyer masts, the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since the Battle of Midway. He was a lone wolf circling a heavily guarded den. The silence broke at 0300 on June 6th. A Japanese patrol plane, its engines droning in the darkness, caught the fleeting glimpse of a periscope's wake 15 miles north of the anchorage. The alarm was raised. The hunt was on. From Tawi-Tawi, 3 destroyers, Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanikaze, surged into the moonlit sea. They were veteran hunters, their crews sharp, their captains under direct orders to protect the fleet at all costs. They spread out in a deadly search pattern, their sonars pinging actively, methodically boxing in the suspected submarine's location. On board Harder, the soundman tracked the approaching pings. 3 sets, closing. Dealey climbed to the periscope well. The lead destroyer, Minazuki, filled his lens. She was zigzagging, making a torpedo solution difficult. Behind her, her 2 consorts fanned out. The trap was springing shut. Dealey made his decision. He would not try to slip away. He would apply his new calculus. If one destroyer could be broken by a head-on charge, perhaps the shock could scatter 3. Right full rudder, all ahead flank. Make your tubes ready forward. He swung Harder's bow not away, but directly towards the charging Minazuki. In the conning tower, the crew felt the boat shudder as the diesels pushed her to maximum submerged speed. The range closed with terrifying speed. 1,100 yards, 900, time to collision, 96 seconds. Every man knew what down the throat meant now, not in theory, but in the shuddering reality of their hull. Fire, then dive under the enemy's keel. A miss meant the destroyer would be right on top of them, its depth charges already in the water. At 750 yards, Dealey fired 3 torpedoes. Take her down, 300 feet, emergency dive. Harder's nose plunged at a steep 30-degree angle. The crew braced. 40 seconds later, the ocean above them convulsed. 1. 2 tremendous explosions shook the boat violently, shattering light bulbs and throwing men against their stations. Then a third, even closer, lifted Harder's stern and slammed it down. The boat groaned in protest. An eternity later, Dealey eased back up to periscope depth. He swept the horizon. Where the Minazuki had been, there was only a spreading oil slick, swirling debris, and the 2 halves of a 1,250-ton destroyer slipping beneath the waves. The other 2 hunters, stunned by the sudden, violent loss of their leader, were racing away, dropping depth charges at random in their panic. In his cabin aboard the flagship at Tawi-Tawi, Admiral Toyota received the report at 0900. 1 destroyer, sunk in minutes. His secure anchorage was under direct, audacious attack. His response was immediate and furious. He dispatched 6 more destroyers to the area. By noon, patrol planes were crisscrossing the sky every 20 minutes. But Samuel Dealey wasn't finished. He had just proven his equation under the worst possible conditions. The hunter-killer groups were now hunting him, and he was about to show them that the darkest night belonged not to the surface hunters, but to the predator that could strike from the void below. The echo of the depth charges faded, but the hunt was far from over. Admiral Toyoda's order had turned the waters around Tawi-Tawi into a swirling tempest of prowling destroyers and scanning aircraft. For Commander Dealey and the crew of the Harder, the immediate victory over the Minazuki was not a reason to disengage. It was a signal to press the advantage. The psychological shock was a weapon as potent as their torpedoes, and Dealey intended to wield it through the coming darkness. June 7th, 1944. Aero 2:30 hours. The ocean was a pitch-black void, a moonless sky shrouded by heavy cloud cover. Perfect. Harder broke the surface, her diesel engines roaring to life, gulping air to recharge depleted batteries. On the bridge, lookouts scanned the impenetrable gloom with binoculars, their ears straining over the rumble of their own engines. The risk was monumental, but necessary. Below, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion and wired tension. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency of men living on borrowed time, aware they were the sole focus of the Imperial Japanese Navy's wrath in this sector. At 0312, the tension snapped. The radar operator's voice, tight and controlled, cut through the control room. Radar contact. Single ship. Bearing 095. Range 8,000 yards. Closing fast. Dealey was on the bridge in seconds. The contact was moving at 28 knots. In these waters, at that speed, it could only be one thing: another destroyer. This was the Hayanami, a 1,700-ton member of the Yugumo class, a fast, modern killer. Her captain, Commander Hideo Kuboki, had been fruitlessly searching for the American submarine since Oro 100. Frustrated and weary, he had just received orders to return to base. His lookouts were tired, his radar operators scanning a largely empty sea. The concept of an American submarine not hiding, but actively hunting them on the surface, in the dark, violated every tactical assumption. On the Harder, Dealey made a decision that defied all conventional submarine doctrine. All ahead flank. Steer directly for the contact. The order was met with a moment of stunned silence. They were on the surface, a slow, low-slung silhouette, ordering a full-speed charge at a destroyer that could outrun and outgun them. But Dealey's calculus was precise. He was exploiting another blind spot: radar technology of the era. By closing the range aggressively, he aimed to get inside the destroyer's minimum radar detection range before its operators could distinguish Harder's small echo from sea clutter. It was a game of chicken played on a rolling black chessboard. Harder's diesels pushed her to her maximum surface speed of 21 knots, the bow wave hissing. At 4,000 yards, the gamble entered its critical phase. Aboard the Hayanami, a radar operator did note a small, fast surface contact. His report to the bridge was logical. Small surface contact, bearing 270, high speed. Possibly one of our destroyers returning to station. Commander Kuboki, eager to get back to port, saw no reason to doubt it. The range continued to bleed away. 3,000 yards. On Harder's bridge, every man held his breath. They were now terrifyingly close, a dark shadow on a darker sea. At 200-300 yards, the illusion shattered for Kuboki. Perhaps a lookout caught the distinct, low profile against a faint, phosphorescent wake. Perhaps intuition born of fear struck. The realization was instantaneous and horrifying. American submarine. All ahead flank. Hard right rudder. Prepare to ram. Kuboki's orders were a scream against the wind. The Hayanami's engines roared, her rudder biting hard as she swung her bow towards the tiny shadow. But it was too late. Dealey had closed to what was, for him, point-blank range. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. From Harder's forward torpedo tubes, 4 Mark 18s shot into the water, their tracks aimed at the looming silhouette of the turning destroyer. Harder then heeled over in a violent, evasive turn. The seconds ticked by. Then 2 blinding flashes erupted amidships on the Hayanami's starboard side, near the aft magazine. The night tore apart. The secondary explosion was cataclysmic. It tore the Hayanami's stern completely off, the force of the blast illuminating the entire horrific scene in a stark, white light. The destroyer, its momentum still carrying it forward, rolled violently onto her side, her propellers still spinning grotesquely in the air as the severed aft section sank. The main hull followed, sliding beneath the waves stern first in less than 2 minutes. Of Commander Kuboki and his 207-man crew, there were no survivors. The sea swallowed them almost instantly. On Harder, there was no time for cheers. The colossal explosions would be a beacon for every plane and ship within 50 miles. Clear the bridge! Dive! Dive! Take her down to 200 feet! Rig for silent running! The klaxon blared. As the hatches slammed shut and the ocean closed over them, the crew could already hear the distant, growing drone of aircraft engines. Japanese patrol planes, like vultures to the carnage, were arriving. 2 destroyers in less than 24 hours. The message to Admiral Toyota was no longer just an alarm. It was a declaration of war by a single boat. Toyota's fury in Tawi-Tawi was volcanic. This was no lucky shot. This was a systematic dismantling of his defensive screen by a Phantom. He could not, would not, tolerate it. The security of the entire mobile fleet was now in question. In a drastic move, he pulled 8 more destroyers from vital convoy escort duties across the region. Their orders were stripped of all nuance. Form hunter-killer groups. Your sole mission: find and destroy the American submarine near Tawi-Tawi. The directive to every destroyer captain was distilled into a ruthless mantra: maximum aggression. No retreat. Kill that submarine. Meanwhile, Dealey, sensing the noose tightening with fresh, angry predators, made a tactical feint. On June 8th, he took Harder south toward the Sibutu Passage. This narrow, treacherous strait between Tawi-Tawi and Borneo was a known Japanese shipping lane, constantly patrolled. It was a gauntlet. Dealey's intention was not just to escape, but to probe. He wanted to see how many of the reinforced hunter packs he could gut before the Japanese High Command finally deciphered his brutal, simple playbook. At 1400 hours, a lookout's whisper confirmed the gamble. 2 destroyers, steaming in a disciplined search formation. The lead ship was the Tanakaze, accompanied by an unidentified escort. They were running a standard, predictable zigzag pattern at 25 knots, changing course every 8 minutes like clockwork. For a patient hunter, predictability was a fatal disease. Dealey studied them for 90 minutes through the periscope, a scientist observing his specimens. Their pattern was rigid. He calculated that after each turn he would have a window of perhaps 30 seconds where their course was steady to set up a firing solution. He maneuvered Harder with exquisite patience, positioning her not for a desperate shot, but for an ambush. He placed his boat directly in their projected path and waited, a stone on the seabed. At 16:30, the Tanakaze turned, her bow swinging precisely onto the bearing Dealey had anticipated. The range closed. 3,000 yards. 2,500. 2,000. Dealey let her come, his voice calm in the conning tower, calling out the distances. At 1,200 yards, well inside the destroyer's effective sonar range but outside the moment of her next zig, he gave the order. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. The torpedoes left at 17-second intervals, a spread designed to account for the last-second jink that never came. The first fish missed ahead. The second struck the Tanakaze just below the bridge. The third was a perfect hit, slamming into the forward magazine. The result was not merely an explosion, it was an eruption. A column of fire, smoke, and debris shot hundreds of feet into the tropical sky. The detonation was so immense that inside Harder, with all hatches sealed, the crew heard it as a deep, metallic crump that vibrated through the hull plates. The Tanakaze was obliterated, her bow severed from the main hull, both sections vanishing in a maelstrom of foam and flame within 3 minutes. The escort destroyer, paralyzed for a moment by the shock, then turned in a frenzy and charged Harder's last known position, her rails lined with depth charges. Dealey was already taking Harder deep, 400 feet, below the thermal layer that confused sonar. The depth charges came, a furious, concussive storm that shook the boat violently, popping light bulbs and straining welds. But they were blind, dropped in rage rather than with precision. After 40 minutes of enduring the pounding, the escort, low on charges and without a clear target, broke off and withdrew. Silence descended in the deep. 3 destroyers. 3 days. In the conning tower, lit by red battle lamps, the crew looked at their captain. There was awe, and there was fear. They had just rewritten naval history, but they had also painted the brightest possible target on their own backs. The entire might of the Japanese destroyer fleet in the Philippines was now solely dedicated to their annihilation. And Dealey, reading the mix of triumph and terror in their eyes, knew the equation had changed again. He had proven his tactic could work against a pack. Now he had to prove they could survive the tsunami of retaliation that was surely coming. The next move would be the most audacious yet. A strike not in the cover of night or the confusion of a chase, but in the merciless light of day, with the enemy watching. June 9, 1944. 500 hours. A pale gray dawn was bleeding across the South China Sea as USS Harder rose stealthily to periscope depth, 12 miles southwest of Tawi-Tawi. The atmosphere in the conning tower was a tangible mixture of exhaustion and hyper-alertness. The crew had existed for days on a jagged edge of adrenaline, the relentless cycle of attack, dive, evade, and endure the concussive hell of depth charges etching deep lines of fatigue on every face. Yet, as Commander Dealey pressed his eye to the rubber-cupped lens of the periscope and made a slow, deliberate sweep, a new kind of tension seized the compartment. A cold, quiet dread. What he saw made the blood run cold in his own veins, a sensation he refused to let show. 4 destroyers, he announced, his voice unnervingly flat. Line abreast formation. Active search. He relinquished the scope to his executive officer. One by one, the officers looked. The sight was a submariner's nightmare. The 4 Japanese warships, identifiable as a mix of Asashio and Kagero-class vessels, were steaming in a perfectly spaced line, their bows churning identical white wakes, methodically scouring the ocean for them. This was no random patrol. This was a coordinated dragnet, the direct and furious result of Toyota's orders. Through the hull, even without headphones, the sound man could hear the distinct, aggressive ping, ping, ping of their active sonars, a relentless, metallic heartbeat, searching for the echo of their steel. Harder had 8 torpedoes remaining, 4 destroyers. The arithmetic was brutal and inescapable. He would get, at best, 1 or 2 shots before the remaining warships converged and overwhelmed them with a depth-charge assault from which there could be no escape. This was the culminating moment. The Japanese had adapted their formation to counter a lone attacker, presenting a wall of overlapping sonar coverage and firepower. The aggressive zigzag of the lead ship was a clear attempt to bait a shot and reveal their position. The second destroyer in line, however, held a steadier course, its captain perhaps overconfident in the protection of the formation, or simply following a stricter search grid. In that slight variance, Dealey saw the only sliver of opportunity. "The second destroyer," he said quietly, his mind already calculating angles, speeds, and the gyroscopic settings for the torpedoes. "We wait for her turn." For 40 agonizing minutes, Harder hovered at periscope depth, a frozen statue in the water, her crew moving like ghosts to avoid any noise that might betray them. The pinging grew louder, then faded, then louder again as the line of hunters passed and repassed. Finally, at 06:12, the tactical opening appeared. The second destroyer, completing a leg of its search pattern, turned directly toward Harder's position. It was a textbook maneuver to cover a new sector of ocean, but to Dealey, it was an invitation. "Bearing steady, range 4,000, stand by forward tubes." His commands were whispers in the silent control room. The destroyer grew larger in the periscope crosshairs, a slab of gray war steel growing from a smudge to a detailed monster. 3,000 yards, 2,500. Dealey let her come, compressing the range to ensure a kill shot that would be so shocking, so immediate, it might paralyze the others. He was betting everything on the psychological impact. "Range, 1800, fire 1, fire 2, fire 3. A triplet of torpedoes lanced from Harder's bow tubes, their paths converging on the destroyer's port side. The wait was mere seconds. The result was apocalyptic. All 3 warheads struck within a 5-second span. The synchronized detonations did not just hit the ship, they disintegrated it. A volcanic eruption of flame, smoke, and shattered steel bloomed against the dawn sky. Debris, twisted gun mounts, pieces of deck plating, unidentifiable fragments, was hurled over 300 feet into the air, hanging for a surreal moment before raining down into a suddenly boiling sea. The destroyer's back broken, it rolled onto its side with terrifying speed, its superstructure smashing into the water, and vanished in a great whirlpool of foam and oil in less than 90 seconds. From detection to destruction, the attack had taken less than 2 minutes. On Harder, there was no time for observation. The other 3 destroyers, their orderly formation shattered into chaos, immediately wheeled inward like a pack of wolves closing on a wounded prey. Their sonar pings became a continuous, screaming barrage. "Take her deep! 500 feet! Rig for depth charge! Rig for silent running!" Harder's bow tilted sharply downward as her planes bit into the water. They had just reached 300 feet when the first pattern of depth charges exploded above them. The Japanese captains, enraged and frightened, were not waiting for perfect solutions. They were saturating the area with high explosives. The next 2 hours were a descent into a submerged hell. The lights were the first to go, shattered by the initial concussions, plunging the boat into a darkness broken only by the weak, eerie glow of battery-powered battle lamps. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The ocean itself seemed to rage against them. Depth charges detonated in clusters. 23 in the first 10 charges detonated in clusters. 23 in the first 10 minutes alone. Each explosion was a monstrous, crushing hammer blow on the hull. The sound was not just heard, it was felt in the bones. A sequence of deafening crump booms that slammed the boat sideways, then upwards, then shook it like a terrier with a rat. The pressure hull groaned in torment, a deep metallic agony that spoke of metal strained beyond its design. A high-pressure seawater pipe in the forward torpedo room let go with a sound like a cannon shot, spraying a jet of icy water across the compartment. Men scrambled in the semi-darkness, slipping on tilting decks to clamp it shut. Cork insulation rained from the overhead like black snow. Gauges shattered, their glass littering the deck plates. The air grew thick with the smells of sweat, fear, ozone from electrical shorts, and the sharp tang of seawater. Dealey stood braced in the control room, his face a mask of concentration in the hellish strobe of each close detonation. His orders were minimal, whispered into the sound-powered phone. "Steady as she goes. 2 knots. Make no sudden turns." Their only hope was to be a ghost, to creep away at minimal speed, emitting less noise than the churning, explosive chaos around them. Men worked in terrified silence, plugging leaks, isolating damaged systems, their ears ringing, their bodies bruised from being thrown against machinery. Each close explosion brought the certain thought, "This is the one. This is the one that cracks us open." Miraculously, none did. The Japanese, for all their fury, were dropping charges based on an initial fading sonar contact and their own rage. Harder, creeping deeper and staying silent, slowly slipped out of the lethal radius. After 2 eternities, 120 minutes, the frequency of the explosions diminished, then ceased. The pinging faded. The hunters, low on depth charges and bereft of a target, had withdrawn. An hour later, Dealey risked a periscope observation. The sea was empty, save for a distant, dissipating oil slick, the grave of the 4th destroyer. 4 enemy warships sunk in 4 days, an unimaginable feat. Yet in the control room of the Harder, there were no celebrations. The men slumped at their stations, hollow-eyed with a fatigue that went deeper than bone. The boat herself was wounded, leaking, her systems battered. And Dealey was not thinking of medals or headlines. He was thinking of fuel, the high-speed runs, the deep evasive maneuvers, the constant use of the pumps. It had all consumed precious diesel. A quick calculation by the chief engineer was grim. They had burned through over 60% of their reserves. They had perhaps 3 more days of effective patrol before they would be forced to break off and make the long, perilous journey south to Fremantle, Australia. Their time as the scourge of Tawi Tawi was running out, measured now in gallons. At 1400 hours that same day, June 9th, aboard the super battleship Yamato in Tawi Tawi anchorage, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the 1st Mobile Fleet, received the cumulative reports. The figures were stark, incomprehensible. 4 destroyers lost to 1 submarine. The math he did was not of tonnage, but of vulnerability. Ozawa was a carrier admiral, a master of the new aerial warfare. His entire strategy for the coming decisive battle Operation A-Go, depended on his carrier strike forces being able to locate and attack the American fleet, while his own fleet remained protected. This protection rested on his screen of destroyers and cruisers. If a single American submarine could penetrate that screen so easily, picking off his escorts one by one like a sniper, then the entire anchorage, with its priceless concentration of carriers, was not a fortress. It was a trap. The submarine wasn't just sinking ships, it was shredding the very concept of security for the mobile fleet. Ozawa sent an urgent encrypted dispatch to Admiral Toyota in Tokyo. The message was unequivocal. The mobile fleet must depart Tawi-Tawi immediately. The Americans knew their location. Every hour they stayed increased the risk of a catastrophic torpedo attack on a carrier or battleship. Toyota, the architect of the A-Go plan, was caught in a strategic vice. His meticulously timed operation called for the fleet to sortie on June 15th to intercept the American invasion force near the Mariana Islands. Moving 6 days early was a nightmare. It meant his carriers would sail into the battle zone without the crucial preliminary reconnaissance flights to locate the enemy. His destroyer screens, already depleted and scattered from the anti-submarine frenzy, would not be properly regrouped. His vital tanker supply train, scheduled to rendezvous later, would be out of position. The entire intricate battle plan would unravel before a single plane was launched. But the alternative, staying at Tawi-Tawi with an invisible, relentless submarine executioner, systematically exterminating his fleet's guardians, was, as Ozawa argued, tactical suicide. The specter of the Harder, more than any intelligence report of gathering American carrier groups, forced the decision. On June 10th, at 800 hours, the great Japanese mobile fleet weighed anchor. In a majestic, terrifying procession, 4 battleships, including the Leviathan Yamato, 9 aircraft carriers, 15 cruisers, and 24 remaining destroyers steamed out of Tawi-Tawi and turned northeast toward the Philippine Sea. They were leaving early, off balance, and afraid. American radio intelligence at Pearl Harbor, the listening post, known as Station Hypo, intercepted the movement orders within hours. The code breakers and analysts, who had been tracking the buildup at Tawi-Tawi, now had the confirmation they needed. The enemy fleet was on the move, and they were moving early. This intelligence flashed to Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Those 6 days were a gift of incalculable value. They gave Spruance's Task Force 58, 15 fast carriers and their battle groups, precious extra time to position themselves, to refine their own plans, to prepare an ambush for a fleet they now knew was coming, and coming in disarray. Samuel Dealey, creeping away from Tawi-Tawi with a battered submarine and a weary crew, knew nothing of this. His war was measured in torpedoes remaining, fuel gallons, and the next sonar ping. He had set a series of tactical explosions. Unknowingly, he had just triggered a strategic chain reaction that would culminate in the open ocean, in a battle where the skies, not the depths, would decide the fate of empires. The stage was now set for the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and the man who helped set it would not be there to see it. He had one last personal duel to fight. The silence after the last depth charge was a physical presence in the control room of the Harder, thick and heavy with spent adrenaline and the sour smell of fear. They had survived the concentrated wrath of a destroyer division, but the cost was etched into every strained bulkhead and into the exhausted faces of the crew. Commander Dealey's immediate calculation was practical. They were low on torpedoes, critically low on fuel, and their boat was bleeding from a dozen minor wounds. The strategic triumph of forcing the mobile fleet to sea was a fact unknown to them. Their reality was the need to disengage and run the gauntlet back to safety. On June 10th, at 16:30 hours, as Harder crept north of the Sibutu Passage, the choice to leave was taken from them. The lookout's report was terse. 2 more destroyers running a high-speed, aggressive search pattern. They were not meandering. They were hunting. Their movements sharp, angular, covering water with a vengeful purpose. These were ships from the fresh hunter-killer groups, their captains blooded by the losses of the past days and operating under Toyota's mandate of maximum aggression. Dealey had 5 torpedoes left, 1 spread, 1 final act of defiance. At 17:15, he fired 3 of his last precious fish at the lead destroyer. The range was long, the angle poor. 1 torpedo struck near the bow, a glancing blow that sent a geyser of water into the air and caused the destroyer to stagger, slowing dramatically. But it did not sink. It wallowed, wounded, a cripple. Its consort, however, did not hesitate. It turned with vicious intent and charged directly at Harder's position, engines screaming for flank speed. This was the moment every submariner feared, weapons empty, a predator bearing down, and nowhere to hide. Dealey's response was instinctual and desperate. "Fire 4 and 5! Down the throat!" The last 2 torpedoes leapt from the tubes, a final, hopeless gamble to stop the charge. Both missed, their tracks crossing harmlessly ahead of the on-rushing bow. "Emergency deep! All ahead flank! Take her down! 600 feet!" Harder's nose plunged. The diving planes bit hard, forcing the submarine into a steep, screeching descent. 300 feet, 400, 500. The pressure hull moaned in protest, still tender from the previous day's punishment. Above them, they could hear it, a sound that froze the blood. The high-speed, rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the destroyer's propellers, churning the water into a frothing maelstrom directly overhead. The noise passed, deafeningly close, a promise of imminent death. Then, silence. A more terrifying sound. Dealey knew the pattern. The destroyer was circling back. Without torpedoes, Harder was not a combatant. It was prey. Their only option was a grim war of attrition. Dive as deep as the battered boat could withstand. Move as slowly and quietly as possible. And endure. They had to outlast the destroyer's supply of depth charges and its captain's patience. The first pattern came at 17:23. 6 depth charges, set to explode at a medium depth, detonated in a tight cluster. The concussions slammed harder, rolling her 15 degrees to starboard. Every loose object clattered across the deck. Men were thrown against valves and pipes. Light bulbs imploded in a shower of glass. 2 minutes later, a second pattern, closer. These explosions lifted the submarine's stern and slammed it back down with brutal force. Cork insulation rained from the overhead like black hail. A hydraulic line in the control room burst with a sharp hiss, spraying fluid across the plotting table. For 90 minutes, the destroyer conducted a methodical, sadistic hunt. It made pass after pass, dropping 42 depth charges in total. Most exploded too shallow or too far away, but 3 were near misses of terrifying precision. Gauge glasses on vital instruments cracked with sounds like gunshots. New leaks sprang in the aft torpedo room, the cold seawater a constant, creeping reminder of their fragility. Dealey held Harder at 500 feet, a depth that strained her tested limits, ordering a bare 2 knots of speed. The crew worked in absolute silence, communicating by hand gestures, their world reduced to the groans of the hull and the approaching, receding, and detonating hell from above. Finally, at 1900 hours, the explosions ceased. The propeller sounds faded, then disappeared. The destroyer had exhausted its arsenal. Dealey made them wait a full, agonizing hour in the deep, silent darkness before venturing up. When they broke the surface, the ocean was empty, shrouded in a benevolent night. They limped south toward Fremantle at a fuel-sipping 8 knots, a bruised and bleeding victor. They arrived on June 26th. The moment the lines were secured, Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarines Pacific, was on the pier. He had followed Dealey's sparse, electrifying radio reports via intercept. 5 destroyers attacked, 4 confirmed sunk, 1 damaged. In 12 days, Dealey had authored the single most destructive anti-destroyer patrol in naval history. Lockwood awarded Dealey the Navy Cross on the spot. Then, looking the weary but defiant commander in the eye, he asked the question that defined their desperate war. "Can you do it again?" Dealey's answer was immediate. "Give me torpedoes and I'll sink 10. By late July 1944, the Harder was refitted, resupplied, and her crew, infused with new replacements, was drilled relentlessly by Dealey on the down-the-throat doctrine. His patrol report was no longer a curiosity. It was a textbook, studied by every submarine commander in the Pacific. The proof of its effectiveness was already in the numbers. In the weeks following Harder's return, American submarines, emboldened by the example, sank several more Japanese destroyers using aggressive tactics. The psychological barrier was broken. On August 5th, Harder departed on her 6th war patrol. This time she was not a lone wolf, but the lead boat of a wolf pack with USS Harder and USS Harder. Their mission: to savage Japanese shipping west of Luzon, Philippines. Initially, it was a triumphant return to form. The pack ambushed a convoy off Palawan, sinking 4 cargo ships. They struck coastal defense vessels. The Harder was credited with destroying 2 frigate-type ships. By August 23rd, the Harder, out of torpedoes, withdrew. Only Harder and Harder remained on station off Dassault Bay. Japanese intelligence, reeling from months of losses, had adapted. They could not break American codes, but they had become adept at radio direction finding and traffic analysis. They had tracked the Wolfpack's movements, correlating attacks with intercepted transmission bearings. They knew approximately where the American submarines were operating, and they dispatched a new kind of hunter to deal with them. At 0453 on August 24th, USS Harder was submerged 4 miles off Hermana Mayer Island. Through her periscope, her captain could see the Harder on the surface, 4,500 yards to the south, a dark silhouette against the pre-dawn gloom. Both boats were stalking a damaged Japanese destroyer reported in the area. Then, Harder's sonar operator heard it, a sound that turned his stomach to ice. Ping, ping, ping. Active sonar. Close, and getting closer. It was not a lone destroyer. It was a pair of dedicated modern anti-submarine warfare vessels, the Kaiboken CD-22, a small, nimble escort ship, and the minesweeper PB-102. These were not frontline fleet destroyers. They were specialists, built for one job: finding and killing submarines. They had been hunting this wolf pack for 3 days, their crews sharp, their equipment tuned. They had followed the trail of radio signals and attack reports straight to Dassault Bay. Harder's captain immediately took his boat deep and silent, becoming a passive, horrified witness. He tried to radio a warning to Harder. No response. Either Harder's radio was off, or she was already in the process of diving. On Harder, the detection came at the last possible second. A lookout must have seen a silhouette, or the radar operator caught a fleeting blip. Dealey's reaction was instantaneous. "Crash dive! All ahead flank! Maximum dive angle!" It was too late. The Japanese ships were already inside 2,000 yards, their sonars locked on. Harder's dive was violent and revealing. In the frantic emergency procedure, her diesel engines were still running as she submerged, an extreme measure to get down fast. It created a catastrophic telltale, a massive, roiling trail of exhaust bubbles that rose to the surface, pinpointing her exact location like a flashing arrow. For the sonar operator on CD-22, it was a gift. The contact was perfect. Range 1,200 yards, depth 200 feet, and descending. The escort's captain needed no further information. He ordered an immediate full-pattern depth charge attack on the first pass. At 0547, the first pattern of charges, set for 250 feet, rained down. They were not dropped in hope, but with precision. At least 3 exploded within 50 feet of Harder's hull. The effect was catastrophic and instantaneous. The submarine's pressure hull, already stressed from the ordeal in June, cracked open near the after torpedo room. Seawater at colossal pressure erupted into the compartment. The stern flooded completely in under 90 seconds. Inside Harder, chaos reigned. The sudden weight in the stern wrenched the bow upward at a sickening angle before the entire boat began to drag backward into the deep. Dealey, fighting for his boat's life, gave the final, desperate order. "Emergency blow! Blow all ballast!" Compressed air screamed into the ballast tanks, fighting against the torrent of incoming sea. It was a futile battle. The flooding was too massive, too fast. Harder could not overcome the weight. She struggled, suspended for a moment, then began to sink again, stern first. At 0552, CD-22 made a second pass. This pattern was even more accurate. The depth charges detonated directly alongside the mortally wounded submarine. The main pressure hull ruptured in multiple locations. The control room flooded in a roaring instant. All electrical power died. The emergency lights flickered and went dark, leaving only the screams of rending metal and the roar of the ocean. At a depth well below 400 feet, far past her tested crush depth, the inevitable happened. The sea's immense pressure found the weak points. The hull imploded. Bulkheads collapsed like paper. Compartments were crushed instantaneously into mangled voids. It was over in less than 3 minutes from the first hit. By 0600, CD-22 and PB-102 reported a successful kill. A large oil slick, mixed with wood debris, cork, and other wreckage, spread across the surface of Desal Bay. They circled for 2 hours, dropping more charges to ensure the kill. There were no survivors to recover. All 79 men aboard the Harder were gone. Commander Samuel Dealey, radio man Calvin Bull, who had earned a Bronze Star for his part in the June destroyer kills, every officer and sailor who had forged a legend. The report reached Admiral Lockwood on August 25th. He immediately suspended operations in the area. The news was released to the public weeks later with the barest of details. USS Harder, presumed lost with all hands. The full story remained sealed in classified files. In Japan, Admiral Toyoda received the report on August 26th. The submarine that had terrorized his fleet, sunk 4 of his destroyers, and indirectly panicked his commanders into a premature departure, was finally gone. He ordered a commendation for the crew of CD-22. What Toyoda could not see, and what Lockwood understood with tragic clarity, was that Dealey's victory was already complete. The Harder had not just sunk ships, she had altered the timetable of the Pacific War. Her 4 days in June had sent Ozawa's fleet into the Philippine Sea early, disorganized, and blind, a direct contributor to the cataclysmic American victory in the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot just days later. The hunter had been killed, but the hunt he inspired had changed everything. The tactical revolution was irreversible, and the path to Japan's defeat, though still bloody, was now etched in the hard-learned lessons of one submarine's relentless aggression. The oil slick over Daysol Bay dissipated. The official telegrams reached next of kin. In the vast bureaucratic machinery of the U.S. Navy, the loss of USS Harder, SS-257, was recorded, filed, and, for the duration of the war, shrouded in the necessary silence of classified operations. But the echo of her 4 days in June 1944 did not fade. It reverberated through the remainder of the Pacific War, transforming submarine doctrine, sealing Japan's fate, and etching the names of 79 men into the permanent record of naval warfare. The story of Harder is not one that ended in August 1944. It is one that was just beginning to be understood. The strategic ripple, a battle won before it was fought. While Samuel Dealey's final patrol ended tragically, his fifth patrol had already achieved a strategic victory of staggering proportions. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought from June 19, 1944, commenced just 9 days after Harder sank her fourth destroyer and triggered the early departure of the Japanese mobile fleet. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa arrived in the combat area with his forces scattered across 200 miles of ocean. His reconnaissance planes, forced into the air early during the rushed departure from Tawi-Tawi, had burned through precious fuel reserves and failed to locate Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet with clarity. His destroyer screens were disorganized, still regrouping from the frantic anti-submarine sweeps. His vital tanker train was days behind schedule. When American Hellcats found Ozawa's carriers, the Japanese were caught in the act of launching their own strikes. Their combat air patrols were thin, their fleet coordination poor. The result was the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a one-sided aerial massacre where American pilots shot down over 375 Japanese aircraft for losses of about 30. 3 Japanese carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hyo, were sunk by American submarines and aircraft. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier air arm, the core of its offensive power, was effectively obliterated in 2 days. In his post-war analysis, Admiral Charles Lockwood, the Submariner's commander, was unequivocal. Harder's Fifth Patrol was the most strategically important submarine operation of the Pacific War. Forcing the mobile fleet to sortie 6 days early meant the entire Japanese battle plan collapsed before the first shot was fired. The 4 sunken destroyers were a tactical triumph, but the panic they induced was the real weapon. Harder didn't just sink escorts. She severed the nervous system of the Japanese battle plan. The tactical revolution, from prey to predator. Before Harder's Fifth Patrol, U.S. submarine doctrine against warships, especially destroyers, was fundamentally defensive. The fleet boat was a commerce raider. If detected by a destroyer, the manual prescribed go deep, rig for silent running, and evade. Engaging was considered suicidal. Dealey, with his engineer's mind and gambler's nerve, proved the math could be flipped. His down-the-throat tactic worked because it exploited human psychology, not just torpedo ballistics. He understood that Japanese destroyer captains operated on a set of rigid assumptions. A submarine, once spotted, would flee. By charging instead, Harder triggered a paralyzing 8 to 12 second crisis on the enemy bridge. In those seconds, the destroyer captain had to process an unimaginable scenario: choose a new course of action, turn, ram, shoot, and issue orders, all while Mark 18 torpedoes, traveling at 46 knots, closed the final few hundred yards. Most chose wrong. The torpedoes hit before the decision could be executed. The proof was in the brutal statistics. Between June and December 1944, emboldened by Harder's proven template, American submarines aggressively hunted warships. USS Tang, SS 306, under the legendary Richard O'Kane, sank 2 destroyers. USS Trigger, SS 237, and USS Barb, SS 220, each accounted for another. USS Flasher, SS 249, used the tactic to sink 3 escort vessels. The overall success rate for these aggressive attacks in mid-1944 was an astonishing 63%. For every 5 head-on charges, submarines sank 3 destroyers and damaged a 4th. Only 1 in 5 attacks failed completely. The Japanese were forced to adapt. By late 1944, destroyer captains developed counter-tactics, turning away to present a narrower target, then circling back to attack the submarine's broadside, or slowing deliberately to let the torpedoes pass ahead, while closing for a ramming attempt. The success rate for American subs dropped to a still respectable 40%, but losses inevitably increased. Between August and December 1944, 9 American submarines, including the formidable Tang, were lost, many to the very destroyers they were hunting. It was the brutal cost of an offensive revolution. Yet the overall calculus remained in America's favor. Submarines were sinking more tonnage, warship, and merchant than ever before. Admiral Lockwood faced the commander's agonizing choice: recall the boats to defensive tactics, or accept higher losses to strangle Japan completely. He chose aggression. The result was the final choking blockade of the Japanese home islands. Between January and August 1945, submarines operating under this aggressive doctrine sank 437 Japanese merchant ships and 53 warships. By the war's end, Japan retained less than 25% of its pre-war merchant tonnage. Its factories starved for resources. Its cities starved for food. Its surviving fleet lay idle for lack of fuel. The submarine campaign, revolutionized by the spirit of Harder, was a primary cause of Japan's economic and military collapse. The physical legacy: a war grave. Found for 80 years, USS Harder rested in the depths of the South China Sea, her exact location a mystery, a tomb for her 79-man crew. Then, in May 2024, an expedition led by ocean explorer Tim Taylor and his Lost 52 project made the discovery. Using advanced autonomous underwater vehicles and deep-sea sonar mapping, they located the wreck. She sits upright on the silty bottom at a depth of 3,650 feet, over 1,100 meters, approximately 12 miles west of Daesol Bay. The imagery reveals a boat mostly intact, a silent testament to her rugged construction. The damage is concentrated aft, consistent with the depth charge attacks reported by CD-22. The pressure hull is ruptured near the conning tower and the after torpedo room. The bow points into the eternal darkness, as if still on patrol. The site is legally protected as a war grave under U.S. and international law. No salvage or disturbance is permitted. The discovery was more than an archaeological triumph. It was an act of closure. It provided a definitive answer to families who had waited 8 decades, confirming the location of their loved ones' final resting place. It transformed the story from a historical narrative into a tangible physical memorial in the deep. The human legacy: memories in bronze and stone. The formal recognitions followed. Commander Samuel Dealey was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. On March 27, 1946, President Harry S. Truman presented the medal to Dealey's widow, Edwina, on the White House lawn. The citation captured the essence of his command. This remarkable record of 5 vital Japanese destroyers sunk in 5 short-range torpedo attacks attests the valiant fighting spirit of Commander Dealey and his indomitable command. The Navy later honored him by naming a destroyer escort, USS Dealey, DE 1006, which served from 1954 to 1972. USS Harder herself was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for her first 5 war patrols and received 6 battle stars for World War II service. Her motto, "Hit 'em harder," became legendary within the silent service. But beyond citations and ship names, the legacy lives in personal remembrance. Commander Dealey is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 59, Grave 874. His headstone is simple, listing his rank, dates, and one powerful line: Medal of Honor, Destroyer Killer. Every year on August 24th, families of Harder's crew gather. They place flowers. They share stories of a radio man from Ohio, a torpedo man from Texas, an officer from California. They remember men like Radio Man First Class Calvin Bull, who at 24 earned a Bronze Star for his part in the June kills and died with his captain. They remember the few who survived earlier patrols, like John D. Moke Highland, who later became a full admiral and was a tireless keeper of Harder's flame until his death. The last surviving crew member, Paul R. Bud Bryce, passed away in 2022 at age 98. With him, the living first-hand memory of serving aboard Harder faded into history. The enduring principle: the charge versus the flight. Today, the down-the-throat attack is not a modern submarine tactic. Wire-guided torpedoes fired from miles away have rendered such point-blank bravado obsolete. Yet, at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis and in war colleges around the world, Harder's patrol reports are still studied. They are a masterclass in tactical audacity and psychological warfare. Instructors teach Dealey's story not for the specific maneuver, but for the fundamental principle it demonstrates. When your enemy expects you to run, charging often works better than hiding. It is a lesson in seizing the initiative, in disrupting the opponent's decision-making cycle, and in the immense power of violating doctrinal assumptions. In an age of algorithms and long-range sensors, the human element of surprise, courage, and aggressive will remains paramount. The 79 men of USS Harder came from 38 states. They were farm boys, mechanics, college graduates. They volunteered for the submarine service, knowing it had the highest casualty rate of any American force in WW2, nearly 22%. They knew the odds were that 1 in 5 boats would not return. They served anyway. They left behind not just a record of sunk tonnage, but a blueprint for aggressive victory. Their story is not one of silent running, but of a defiant, thunderous charge that echoed from the depths of Tawi-Tawi to the halls of naval strategy, reminding us that the course of history can be changed by those with the courage to rewrite the rules of the fight. Their silence now is eternal, but the echo of their war cry, "Hit 'em harder!" resounds wherever the principles of duty, courage, and tactical brilliance are honored.